Okay, welcome to CS Office Hours. It's great to have everyone here today. Today's session is about preparing for the interview journey. I'm really excited about this. This is something that we came up with as we were discussing, really thought about it as a journey. There is an interview journey. Kevin Leonor and Seth Dovev are here today to co-lead the session. And as we were talking about what are recruiters and hiring managers looking for, we realized that there's different stages to the interview journey and different things you want to get across and what your story is. But then if you're on the other side and you're interviewing, what should you be setting up for that interview journey? Where do you want to not only enable the person who's interviewing where they should be by the end of the journey, but what do you need at the end of the journey, right? So it really does go both ways, and it's something to think about. All right. Let me just stop sharing for 1 second. Kevin and Seth, do you want to just maybe wave, say hi, introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm Seth Dovev here. I guess from my experience, I build and lead CS teams in high growth startups. My most recent gig was the senior director and department head of CS at Chili Piper, a B2B enterprise scheduling system. So I'm glad to be here because we did a lot of hiring and, here to be helpful as best as I can.
Awesome. Kevin?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Leonor. I am a senior enterprise customer success manager at a applicant tracking software company that works with all of the people that you're trying to convince them to give you a job. So happy to provide some of the knowledge that I've learned over the time working with these professionals and get you even more empowered.
Awesome. All right. So let's go ahead and dig in. I'll go to the correct screen here. It's all exciting. So some of the things we wanted to share with you is first just orienting you to your resume. We're going to dig into sort of your resume and story a little bit more next week, but really to think about your resume as sort of like the Cliff Notes version, right? Almost like PR. A way to sort of be a teaser. And as Kevin was talking about it, sort of an invitation. Kevin, do you want to speak to sort of that invitation?
Sure, absolutely. So pretty much when it comes to how you're conducting your or constructing your resume is going to be kind of like these high level footnotes about your career that kind of gets the reader wondering, okay, that's interesting. I'm looking forward to this interview because I want to ask them more about that bullet point right there. How exactly did he lead his team to increase NRR by 112%? What were some of the things that he was a part of when he says that he was part of the process committee? What did he work on those things? Those are very interesting things and maybe very relevant to the role that I'm recruiting for. So I want to know a little bit more about that, and the bullet points are going to be there to really provide that allure and that invitation to make me want to know more about you.
Right. And something that I always say is, as a rule of thumb, you get one bullet to describe your overall scope of responsibilities. After that, only achievements. So that to me is critical. You get 4 bullets for your current job or most recent job, 3 for the one after that, 2 or 1 for anything after that. Or if you've kind of OG like me and you've been around since .com was a thing, then you want to maybe bucket some roles and call it as like summary of roles or something like that. Seth, what about you? When you've been interviewing and hiring, is there anything you want to say specifically about a resume?
Yeah, I think, you have to make sure it reads well, right? There has to be a story. I don't think anybody really has the time and the patience, to go through a whole, even though it might be well thought of, but you have to make it attractive and compelling and something for the person who's digesting that information to be like, oh, I really want to learn more, like Kevin said. A couple other things is, there might be cases where you've had a longer stint with multiple roles within a company. So how do you tell that story? I was at a company called Integral Ad Science for 8 years, and I had 4 different roles. How do you tell that story? And sometimes it's challenging. Sometimes I've decided not to put it in there, and I just put in the titles and the roles and the time frames. Sometimes I've done an executive kind of overview of my time there. At the end of the day is you want to make it compelling, and whatever you think is going to catch the eye is okay. And it's also okay to iterate. I've been recently a part of a round of layoffs, and I've had to iterate my resume a couple times, actually working with some of these people here in this conference. So long story short is just be able to tell the story the way that you want to, and also that you can speak to. I think that that's another big piece here. If you can't speak to those 4 bullets, then it's obviously not something that you probably put on there if you can't speak confidently and in the weeds about it.
Yeah, and that's why I really believe people should write up their own resumes as opposed to hiring someone else to do it, because then it's not your story. You don't know what's really that bullet is. What were they talking about there? It's a pain, such a pain to write your own resume, but it is well worth it. Kevin, any last thing you want to say before we move into the journey phases?
Yeah, and the last thing that I want to mention, going back to what you were talking about that first bullet point, in speaking with recruiters, and the stories that you heard are true, about it only taking roughly about 6 seconds for them to review your resume. They did say that it bumps up closer to like 10 to 11 seconds if you are actually meeting all the minimum requirements that they're looking for in the role. So in that first bullet point, what's going to be particularly important is not just the impact or like the results that you are giving to the company, but also the level of scale that you were able to accomplish. So some of the things that they're going to be looking for is how much ARR were you responsible for? What was the size of the average company that you're working with? What was the average book of business in terms of number of customers that you're working with? Those are the very bare minimum things that the recruiter is looking for when it comes to the resume, that they need to check all those boxes before they start to look more in depth into your resume. So clear the first hurdle first and make sure that you're meeting their expectations on level of scale for this particular role that they're hiring for.
Well, and I think that's actually a great way to get started on the interview journey, because when what is the recruiter looking for? First of all, to get through that 6-second screen, to elongate it to an actual 11 seconds that they're looking at you, right? You got to answer some of those key questions. Then you get into the call with them. What are some of the key things that need to be addressed during that call with the recruiter?
Yeah, I can also jump in here because you don't always have a recruiter and you have to do it on your own. So sometimes the hiring manager or executive is really the one kind of first doing that scrub. And I think these are suggested phases. Obviously, I'm sure this is not always in the same order. So be prepared, whoever you're speaking to, that as soon as you apply, you're on the clock, right? And then, so it means if it's coordinating in emails, even before that, you want to be responsive. You want to make sure that you take time and that you keep it simple and right to the point. And, everything is kind of going to be reviewed. The other thing is, I think the piece is carrying over from last week, and I wasn't here from last week, but it's almost like a pitch, right? What's your brand? What's your name? What you do? Why are we here? Be able to leverage that, right? You don't need to speak for 5 minutes telling a story, especially in the early stages. You want to say who you are, why you're here, and some of the alignments in terms of the job description or the company, and why you feel like it's a good fit, and why you're the candidate, not a good candidate, why you need to hire this person. So those are the things that I would really, really make sure you're able to cover. Eye contact, if it's a Zoom meeting, being personable. Communication in our line of work is huge. So making sure that you're available, that you're focused, that you're patient, that you're kind, and that you can also just, talk to a person is another indicator that this person is ready to speak.
All right. All right, Kevin, anything else you want to say specific to the recruiter?
Absolutely. And of course, depending on the organization, it's either the recruiter is recruiting for so many different job families that they don't have a very good concept of what customer success does. Or in some organizations, they may only be hiring within customer success, so they have a very deep understanding. So just knowing that there's that range is how you're going to tackle that recruiter conversation, is understanding that you're going to need to show just the basic functions and knowledge of customer success, and that you were able to demonstrate that in a previous job. So another kind of a good example of a question that recruiters would typically ask in that phase is, walk me through a day in the life of your current role. So that's your opportunity to show them how you conceptualize customer success in your organization on a day-to-day basis. That's not an invitation for you to walk through your entire calendar schedule for the day. It's like, oh, at 8 a.m. I take care of emails. At 9 a.m. I attend internal meetings. It's not that kind of question. It's more of, okay, what are you thinking about when you first come into the office, and how do you prepare yourself for the calls that you're going to have with your customers? How are you using your each individual hour, or the culmination of all those hours, to meet the ultimate goal that you're going to have a champion customer that buys more products, that is a great adoptive user? That's what they're looking to hear from.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And also
Now,
just another thing is just be
yeah.
prepared to speak to, like, what is customer success? That's a nice general question. I don't know if it's a recruiter or maybe in the hiring manager side, but be able to speak to that. Very top line questions, whether it's based off of the job description. So if it's a technical role or implementation, there might be a question there, because when we're trying to qualify those candidates, people are going to be either a yes on that motion and to explore more, or not. So for instance, if that
Wait, you've asked somebody who's applying for a CSM role, what is customer success?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
It's a common
And I
question,
think that
actually.
here's why, because some people might have different perspectives of what it means. Maybe it's more focusing on revenue elements. Maybe it's more focusing on value. Maybe it's more support. So I think that is a really good way of not only leading into how does your experience align with the job description, and then you can build off of that, because usually that JD will cover what that kind of overall role is responsible for. Maybe if they're more focused on the growth manager side versus the technical side of things. It's a really good, easy question. And I think us as leaders and just CS people in this community, we should be able to speak to it and have your own spin to it. Jen,
well,
are you?
there's a lot of people over in the chat who agree with you. Ty asks it every time. Ashna's asked it and answered it. Matthew has also had it asked. So that's interesting. I've never thought to ask how they define CS. That's really interesting. Cool. All right. What now? And I know that we have people who are hiring managers in here as well. So feel free to add in. Ashna, you're adding in. Great. What would you add?
Well, I mean, I probably have too much to add here, but I actually want to point out something Christine mentioned in the chat. She's actually, sorry, Christine, calling you out here, but she's added a donut chart on her resume, explaining kind of like day in the life. And that's gotten a lot of hit. And there's like a bunch of people asking her in the chat, like, we want to see it.
Oh, yeah, we want to see that. If you have examples of that, please put that over in our Slack channel for sure.
Yeah, I'll dump it in the Slack channel. It's a couple of iterations ago, so I'll have to dig it out, but I'll post it. It was, as I said, it did get a lot of play, because it just talked about how I separated my time, how I, the types of main activities that I did.
Interesting.
And also, I think a good way to stand out, I mean, look at all of us here asking you, like, we probably know about, like, how to stand out. And then, like, that would have caught my eye right away. So it's a great way to kind of like stand out.
if we're looking at that, that's something that's going to grab attention, right? It was a clear differentiator because people weren't expecting to see a donut chart on a resume.
All right. And Matthew, what were you going to add?
I was just going to add that I think you need to be really careful with that question, because folks that like us that are kind of dialed in and participating in things like this, like our conception of customer success might actually be more mature than the person that you're speaking with. And like I've been burnt by that, right? Where I've asked that question and that person, a senior CS leader, had a relatively simplistic understanding of CS.
Ouch.
So I think you need to kind of pick your battles, and sometimes you're going to be rolling the dice if you're answering that question, I think.
I get what you're saying, but do you want to go and work there? Don't you want to figure that out during the interview process?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to argue that point, because I challenge it, not saying I don't agree with it but I do think that as someone who's being interviewed, or the interviewer, it gives you a really good understanding of, hey, does this person, is he at that level, whether he's overqualified or underqualified? You know, the goal of interviewing is to see if there's alignment and there's a connection, whether it's from a communication perspective or a responsibility and understanding of that. And if there are red flags either on either side, it's important for both people to call it out. Right?
Yeah.
And that's good, because you don't want to get burnt when you're 6 months in. You're like, I didn't sign up for this. This team has no idea what even CS is.
Yeah.
So
Especially if they think it's like glorified support or something. It's like, come on, folks, let's have support. Support's critical, but let's also do strategic things.
But I think also it is risky. And that's the point, right? You want to make sure you get all that information. You clarify and you clear the air and make sure that,
because you do not want to be searching for your next job at 6 months in because you didn't know that it wasn't the kind of role you want to go for. Yeah, because then people will forever be asking you why you had a short stint. Even when they say, oh, well, you can see all these short stints on people's resumes, they still now, what are they doing? They're saying, oh, why do you have all these short stints? Like, did you see the economy? Anyway, details. All right, so let's dig in, because we're already almost at time, and I want to get through these other points here just so we can kick off the breakout sessions constructively. The panels for team panels, cross-functional panels. Also, like, there can be cultural alignment. When they're looking for culture alignment, you can always find on their website what the company values are, or they don't mention it because they don't really have any. So that's key for you to understand. If they say they've got values, if they don't say they have values, if they're going to if it's important to them, at some point during the interview process, they're going to ask for that, or they'll want to hear you bring that up throughout your interview process to hear that and feel like they get us. This person has also done their homework. They're serious about us. They want to work here. Right. So that's another thing that by understanding what those sort of values or culture that the company says this is what's important, when they're sharing that, if you incorporate that into, it's also like incorporating any of the keywords from the JD when you do your resume or when you're talking, speaking to your skill set. That also signals to the hiring manager, this person gets me. This person gets what my pain is, how I need to solve for it, right? They would, it's like the dating, this person gets me, now I'm going to marry him. All right. So any other thoughts about these panels? What are important for the panels? And also, I know that there's other folks besides Seth and Kevin who may want to weigh in, but let's be brief. Okay. Yes. Dig in.
I was just going to say really quickly, I think that when you're speaking in these panels, sometimes they are your potential colleagues in terms of the CS. So, maybe it's managers that you might not directly report to. Maybe it might be just CSM. So sometimes throwing a couple people in there and getting on the ground, like feedback on, does this person meet the need? Can we talk shop with them? Were they prepared in asking the right questions? Maybe it is, what is a day-to-day experience like? coming from that CSM. So making sure that you're aligning your questions to those types of panels. If it's marketing, how does marketing work with CS? Or the same thing, you can ask very broad open-ended questions. How does product align with CS and customers' needs? What does it look like with the handoff from sales to CS? So those are the type of questions that when you see whoever is on the invite, go to LinkedIn, see what their role is, and then see if you can connect some dots with the website that they have or the product offerings, and see if you can ask the right questions there. That would be another piece throughout this is do your research, no matter who you're meeting with, even if it's the hiring, the recruiter all the way up, make sure you're asking specific questions and know a little bit about them.
And that
I think
reminds me, I also created a spreadsheet because for each of these interview journey phases, we have what the phase is and a column for what the story is that you're trying to get across and a column for what questions you want to ask. So I will make certain that I have that in the Slack and also in the chat by the time you get back from the breakouts. Kevin, what were you going to add?
I'll make this one quick here. It comes back to a term that I like, or a phrase that I like to call be valuable, stay valued. By being staying valuable to these cross-functional people is making sure that you're helping them in their overall goals. When it comes to sales, asking questions about like what does an ideal lead look like if it's coming from customer success? Asking marketing, like what are you looking for as far as people to do case studies with, as far as people to do joint marketing communications with? What are you looking for in the ideal customer that's going to work with you? And how does customer success right now help you achieve those goals? Those are some of the key questions that you can ask in those panel interviews that makes you seem more like a partner and an ally rather than just somebody they have to work with.
And they're usually looking to see if you are informed about these different roles, right? Because there's, if they have somebody on the panel that's in a cross-functional role, it's because they work closely with the CS team, right? So they will have a vested interest in what you have to say. Okay, presentations, anything you want to, what do you, do you have folks do presentations, Seth? Have you had them do it? What do you look for when they're doing presentations?
For me, it wasn't as much of, it was a presentation, but we kind of kept it open. So the scenario for Chili Piper was, we gave them materials and it was more of an exercise. So it was saying, okay, well, we want you to do X, Y, and Z, and then X, Y, and Z, and then X, Y, and Z. So we were looking both from a technical perspective, could they actually do some of the things that we were asking and that the job requires? Not just for us to see if they could do it, but if they wanted to do it, right? If they enjoyed that type of element to this role, which was highly technical and soft skills. So how do you ingest information that's highly technical, and then how do you present it? And then the presentation was a bit of a role play. So it was talking about how do they then present as a CSM and if we were a customer. And it really helped us identify some areas where, hey, maybe they just didn't find those things from a technical perspective that we just need to have. Or two, maybe they do it really technically, but they weren't prepared to present it. And we would throw some Easter eggs in there. We would throw in, before that meeting, hey, some people really like to have visuals and presentations. So it also helps to get a sense if they're active listeners too. That's just right. So
I personally hate doing presentation stuff just because I think it's enough that you're going through an interview process. I don't know, whenever I've had like the practice, QBR stuff, they don't get our company. They're trying to do a QBR about our company. It's like, yeah, but you don't actually get it. So, anyway. But
I think it depends on the role, but I also think it depends on, that leader or what that team is expecting. At the end of the day is that the company is putting in resources and time and money, and they
you got to try and get it right.
Yeah, because hiring and then training and then having to rehire that training when it doesn't work, there's
a lot at stake. Yeah,
there's a lot at stake, especially now.
We used to do that part, the presentation part as a
Mhm.
separate interview. So it wasn't
Yeah,
like it was
yeah.
an onslaught of
Oh, yeah,
info
totally.
in one
Sure.
interview, right? It would have been the first one is usually the easy one. And then we would do a panel one that included the presentation piece to it, so that
Okay.
it was, it was already, we had already qualified people to get that far. And now what we were really trying to do is to say, I've got 7 people who are super qualified. Which one of these is really going to be the best fit for us? And this is truly one of the easiest ways to figure that out.
All right. Andrew, then Chad.
Yeah, I think to Seth's point, it's really important to make sure they have technical aptitude, especially with a technical product. So I agree with that. But I've been on both sides. I'm a hiring manager. I've been an interviewee. And I always felt most freaked out by the presentation because I'd gotten through, like Christine said, the easy one, and then maybe the panel, or maybe a second easy one, and then the panel, and I'm really deep into the process. And I'm like, this is where I'm going to screw up if I screw up, right? And I think the temptation is to do it right. Like, I got to get this right. If I don't get it right, I'm not going to get the job. And for me, you're not going to get it right. To Jen's point, like, you don't know like enough to give the QBR, but also Seth, right? And there's some like tells, right? There's, oh, they went this far and did this. They're a go-getter, right? It's not technical, really. It's how curious are you? So doing it well versus doing it right.
I think
a good job. It's not going to be right.
I think you also, as a hirer, you have to set them up for success. You cannot throw
100%.
someone under the bus. And I think that there's a level of respect, and it shows in that whole process if that person felt supported. We had a buddy system. So at Chili Piper, you could have a Piper pal throughout every stage of the interview. So you could ask those questions to
You
people.
had a Piper pal.
Yeah, so we actually had a
Oh.
coach, and people wanted to suggest and be a part of it. And we'd have a 15-minute chat. And if anybody had questions for every phase, they could book a meeting and talk to someone about what to expect. What is this person like? What are they looking for? And us in the organization would coach them into that. So you have to set people up for success if you're going to do presentations.
I've never heard of a Piper pal before, but I like it. Try and say it 3 times fast. All right, Chad.
I like the Piper pal too. I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
A couple of just tips on the presentation. So the things that I like to test for is sometimes it's just like, is that person going to put in effort? Like how fast are they turning it around? And if they can't, like if they're going on vacation or something, that's fine. But like, that's important. I think the other thing, this trips a lot of people up, is I would intentionally just throw wrenches in the presentation, like questions, and see how the person would react. And what I'm testing for is that person coachable. So if they get really defensive, that's not good. Like, if you or make a mistake, or there's a problem, like just say, okay, great, you're right, I understand, and then move on. And so those little subtleties are really important, and so those are the things just to think about from the presentation side. And I think the last one that I look for is someone to teach me something, like something I just didn't think of, something new. That's maybe a over and above expectation, but just something, think about that. Like, let's say you're doing a presentation and you find some, I don't know, obscure like review or something like that you just didn't think of on their customers or something like that. Like those are things that they just may not have ever seen. So look for that. I remember one person, and he was for an account manager, and he was literally like upselling me on things that I didn't even realize I needed. And it was just done so well. And this person was junior, but it was so effective. I was like, oh, I have to hire that person.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
that person's did like incredibly well in the role.
All right. So when we're talking about this, I want you to think about it in both directions, right? So think about, if you are a hiring manager, maybe you can have a Piper pal for your, or of a sort, whatever you call them. Not every company is called Piper, but have a pal, along the journey, especially if you're serious about them, and otherwise the questions. All right, 2 more quick comments, but we're really late, so we got to go to the breakout sessions. Kevin, then Felicia.
One thing to really take note of too is that a lot of these presentation rounds are usually very late in the stage, probably even the deciding factor for a particular role. So this is one of those chances that you have to really set yourself apart. And the challenge on that is that you're all given the same exact prompt. you're all given the same exact presentation. So how would you differentiate yourself from the rest of the field? The amount of research that you do and how resourceful that you could show that you're in the presentation is going to be very important. I said last week, if for those that weren't there, I actually got the job over at Ring Central because I researched the fact that there were rolling blackouts in the Bay Area during that time, and I told them about how I researched the disaster recovery efforts that we have for our product to make sure if electricity goes down, their call center is not down. And that was something that was really impactful for them because they actually had a blackout right before I arrived to the office. So it's those chances that you have to really differentiate yourself during a time where everybody's given the same resources is going to be super huge.
Felicia, what were you gonna say? Was it Felicia Romano?
Yes, so I was going to say that once I had an interview with a startup, and they were asking me to do a presentation. They gave me content and context, and they fabricated it, using their model. And when I looked at it, I was thinking like, okay, so I know this isn't real because, right? I was totally overanalyzing. Wait a minute, are you a service? Wait a second, what's going on here? I started looking at, was this really for a SaaS company? And, if this is the book of business, should it look like this? So then I said, would it be okay if I had a meeting with my team first so I can get some questions answered? And they said, who would you like to be in the meeting? And I said, well, I think I need to speak with the director and maybe I need to collaborate with sales. And they said, okay. And so they gave me a meeting with 3 people. And then I said, can we have a candid conversation? Because I really want to do well at this, but I think there's some things that I need to know more about in this scenario. And when we looked at it, they looked and said, oh, wait, this doesn't make sense. Okay, you're right. So what we're going to do is, and so it was so bizarre because they would have to really try to create something different. And the person that was interviewing me was the head of CS, and she said, great, do what you can with what you have and then go forward. So I know that do what you can with what you have. And at the same time, I'm like, how can I win? This is not like, but
you asked great questions.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but when I'm interviewing, I want to know what questions you have. I'm going to send you all off with these 2 things. Okay. One is, this is the worksheet. It looks very simple. It's meant to prompt you. You should have more than 1 question you're going to put in. You should have more than 1 story point you're going to put in, but this is just the framework. So it prompts you. This is where you're going to be doing questions here and all of that. We didn't really get into talking about the executive level. So we'll talk about that when we come back, or maybe talk about it in your breakout groups. But for me, I don't ask for presentations. What I try to do is with my questions, get the information. I try to see how they are when they're thinking on their feet. And then it's all about the questions. It is always about the questions for me. So I'm just going to say that. All right. Does everybody have the breakout notes? Did you get that from the chat? If not, can somebody post that again? And I'm going to go and set up the breakout groups. We're going to do that for 20 minutes. And then apparently it's going to be past time for this session tonight. So that's not good. It's great conversation, everybody. Hey, nice to see you. How did it go?
Good, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you end up talking about the executive interview at all?
We didn't, but I can certainly talk about it.
I would love that for you to do that, because we really want to be sure to cover that, since we were, as much as we were discussing things at the beginning, we did not cover the executive interview and how to prepare for that. So welcome back, everybody. Ty has just agreed to start us off with talking about the executive level interview in the customer journey. So I want to start off with that and then see if there's any other things you want to share as we come back. Totally apologize for going over today, but thanks for everybody who's sticking around. Ty.
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of folks here who could add to it, but the things that I really look for, right, is I'm looking for them to solve bigger problems, to do deeper research, right? I want to see them look into, you know, annual reports. I want to see them look into if we have public statements, right, and try to solve a bigger problem. I want them to know what the bigger problem is before they walk in, and I want them to have solutions walking into it. So I would say that's probably the most common thing that I look for. Kevin, looks like you have some to add as well. I know we're short on time, so I'm trying to be brief.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
No.
I'll do one quick too. One of the big things also in the executive interview is when you're asking questions about the higher level pain points that they have. One of the things that you could do, especially those of you that are brand new to CS or brand new to any vertical, is ask them the question about the documentation that they have for onboarding CSMs. And you can leverage the fact that you're new and that you're learning and that you have, maybe you've created a training program before and you've created documentation like that, where now they're killing two birds with one stone by hiring you.
Oh, that like you'd be willing to do the documentation as you go through.
As you go through the.
Yeah, that can be really common in a startup. I got to say what I'll add to, and maybe there's a couple others that want to add to this, but like the most recent place where I was an interim VP, they just gone to Series B, and the CEO was he was the last person to interview every single person in the company because it was his baby, right? And so if you're at a startup, you are going to have an executive interview, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be with that CEO, that founder. If you're at a 30,000 or 100,000 person company, you're only going to do that executive level interview if you're at the executive level. But definitely what I would say is he was always looking to every hire was so critical to him, right? So he was always making certain that this is someone who was going to be able to contribute, who would be able to contribute beyond just that role that they were going to hire for, that they were asking good questions. He really dug into what was their experience, what had they actually done, could they speak to it, were they going to be cool with it, could they engage with the CEO? Because especially in an early stage startup, it was so important that you be able to handle, conversations, all over the map in an organization, right? So that's distinct when you're in an early stage startup, as opposed to 100,000 employee company, right? So thinking about that. Was there anybody else who wanted to add specifically to the executive level sort of?
I was just going to say, do your homework. You really have to know, like, it doesn't matter if it's the CEO or the VP at an enterprise level business. Like, I'm sure there's some thought leadership, maybe articles or videos. Go to their LinkedIn, try and be prepared for you of what is this person, how does he or she, present themselves? What is the most recent thing that they maybe posted about? Or if it was a quarterly business review or annual earnings call, whatever it is, be able to kind of speak their language. I think what they're looking for is this person qualified? They probably know it. They're probably going to ask a question that they've asked every time. My CEO actually would ask another technical question and tell them to go find out if this code was somewhere. Be prepared for the unknown, but if you do your research, I think you'll be able to understand some of those things. And you can also ask the person before. Ask the HR, or the hiring person, what should I be prepared for? What do I need to expect? And I think that can also help. It's okay to ask questions. If they're investing in you, ask questions so that you can feel prepared. It's okay to shoot them a line and say, hey, I just had a couple follow-ups in my prep for the meeting with the CEO. Do you have 5 minutes? I would rather someone be more prepared than underprepared. So that would be my best practice.
Yeah, if you're actually making it all the way to an interview with somebody who's at the executive level, then they've narrowed it down to either just you or to just you and one other, something like that. So they are invested in wanting to show that they've made a good decision as well. So they will be invested in your success at that point. Maybe not as much after just the recruiter part of the interview, but definitely by the time they get to that. Any
I was just
other,
gonna say also
yeah.
Glassdoor, sometimes they have some little nuggets of information about the interview process. So, that's another
Glassdoor.
awesome
Yeah.
opportunity to kind of just get some feedback. Sometimes it's the negative, but you can learn from it so you don't become the negative and it's the positive. So again, find those little Easter eggs. It will take some time, but be prepared.
Yep. And go so far as to work your network, right? Do you know someone who worked there? Know somebody who used to work there? Hop on a call with them, send them a coffee.
Andrew?
So this is kind of not an every situation thing, but I have had really good success with kind of asking them a question that they might not like, right? Like ask them a really hard question. I used Glassdoor on an interview one time and I said, look, I just gotta know, man, because I got you on the phone. I'm looking at the reviews of people who have left and it's a little concerning. I'm sure that hits you at a certain point. Help me understand what's changed or what happened, or I'd love to hear your thoughts on maybe the cause and effect of that, or if something had to change in order to rectify that, what was it? And it's going to make them very uncomfortable because you're asking a CEO to talk about maybe a failure, but it's speaking truth to power, and that's well respected, especially in a startup, but really by any exec. Are you going to be straight with me? Are you going to shoot me straight, or are you going to be somebody who tiptoes around?
And the key to what you were just saying, Andrew, is giving them the opportunity to say that something has changed, that something has improved, that they've had an opportunity to learn from that, right? Yeah, that's a really great point, Andrew.
Yeah, because the other thing CEOs like to do is teach you stuff. So give them an opportunity to teach you stuff and they will love you.
Nice. Felicia? Barbara. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and researching the company is not just for, just for demonstrating knowledge. They're going to hire me, and I may be there for 3 to 5 years. Can they afford to keep me for 3 to 5 years? Am I comfortable with the decisions that they're making, and even just knowing how am I going to contribute, right? And make them successful. And I have to believe that my efforts are going to be worthwhile. So yeah, I want to know all of that, and I want to know what the CEO is doing, and who's the CFO, and how many changes have they had in their C-suite leadership. I want to know all those things before I roll in there, because they're going to be cutting my check, and I'm going to be working real hard to earn it. So it goes both ways.
That is such a great point, Felicia. And that was definitely sort of the spirit in which we added the questions to ask, not just to be able to show, hey, look how smart I am, but this is a match or it's not. This is a two-way street. And you are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. Absolutely, Felicia. Great point. Trevor.
Yeah, I actually don't have a direct thing myself, but I actually am going to call out Kevin, because Kevin once told me a really good example of what to ask when it comes to executives. He said that basically with executives, one way that you can sort of frame your questioning with them is if you find something in their past, or you find something in how they run business or think about things, that you show that you want the job so you can work with them specifically.
Right. So hey, I'm a big fan. Who doesn't want to work with someone who's a big fan?
Well, a big fan, but more than that, let me stop. Kevin, you're the one who has this example. Why don't you?
Okay. All right, cool.
It was Mary Poppin. When I got the job over at Involve, during my interview process there, I told her that I was still working at Zoom. I said the only reason why I would leave Zoom is just to work with you and learn from you, because I'm such a big fan. So that was, and even though I was part of those layoffs there, she still stayed on to be my mentor. So I gained that, and forever grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah, and that's really true. When you know that there's somebody that you can really learn from, right, who is on the team, and you've identified that, yeah, call it out and show that you recognize that and what you're going to do with that and how you'll contribute. And yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right, Bhumika. Did I pronounce your name correctly, Bhumika?
Yeah, you
Okay.
got it. Yeah.
Sort of.
So
Right.
I'm curious what everyone's thoughts are on this. We were discussing this in the group. Would you ask about like the company valuation? If you can't find it on Crunchbase, it's a private company. Is that something that you would ask? Like, how much runway do you guys have? Like, how successful is this company, and what's the future like? Because, like you said, it's a two-way street. So I'm curious if people feel like that's a good question to ask them, or does it make you seem ignorant in some way?
Absolutely, I would absolutely ask. If you can't find it, highlight that. Say, I'm just prepping. I couldn't find any information about valuations or their current round of potential funding. I'd love to know more about that. And I would say runway might be a hard question for some people. Maybe it's not the hiring manager, but the executive. Great question to ask. They should know that. And if they don't know that, that's probably a problem. So I would say that make sure that you're asking those questions to the right audience, but it's definitely something that if you can't find a piece of information that's important for you and knowing the long-term, trajectory of the business, now's the time to ask. So I think that's a great question to ask. Really powerful.
But I hope the hiring manager knows that.
Yeah, I was actually, so
I think that sometimes people don't feel comfortable in certain levels being privy to sharing that with candidates. So I would ask a recruiter. I wouldn't ask a manager, that only has 2 reports, but I would ask the department head. I would ask, a VP. I would ask an executive. So I think that question needs to be strategically placed, but that's my perspective.
You could also ask it as a 2-parter. Like it's not just what does a runway look like for you, but also how does this position help extend that runway? So now you're looking at not just information for yourself, but you're also trying to show how you can also be an asset to that part of the business equation.
I love that.
Yeah, that's a great question. All right, Trevor.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention that I brought up in my group is, and this is something I've had to learn myself, is if you're trying to transition into customer success, you don't have to think of it only as, hey, I need to go work for a SaaS company. You can do customer success in so many different kinds of industries and so many different kinds of ways. Like for me, I don't work for a SaaS company. I work for a company who resells other people's SaaS products, but I don't work for the SaaS company itself. But I still do customer success. Other people, I'm sure in this call, may not even work for a SaaS company and they do customer success. So it's not only tied to that kind of environment.
Right, because also, even if you are a SaaS company, you may also sell services, or you might have professional services. There's always a various streams of revenue. It's just something to think about, though, is what is the stream of revenue, right? Because that does change your positioning a little bit in terms of how you're doing customer success. Felicia, I see you nodding your head a lot. I don't know if you wanted to add in on that. Felicia Barbera, sorry. I know that there's could be more than one Felicia nodding her head. Oh, you're on mute. Or maybe you weren't. Okay. Anyway, so what I was going to say, though, is that, oh, now are you back, Felicia?
No, I was just going to say the revenue stream needs to be significant so that my portion of it can compensate me appropriately. That's all.
Oh, well, there's definitely that. But, just as like Bhumika was just asking about, like, what are your overall financials and that sort of thing? Like, how do they make money? How do they go to market? You want to be sure that you can understand that how you can from their website and other sources, but also through the interview process, right? How are they, is there opportunity for upsell and cross-sell and those types of activities? If so, that's a big part of the post-sales process. Is that something where you're going to be the commercial CSM as part of it? Or is there somebody else who's doing the paper and you're going to be contributing in some way? Do they track the CS qualified leads that go towards those sales processes? If so, your position is elevated. If not, you're thought of as support and onboarding and everything else. It's part of the cost, equation as opposed to the revenue equation. Those kinds of questions throughout the interview process, based upon who you're talking to, helps you identify what sort of role you're going to play. Andrew?
Yeah, and on that, you guys who've been in these meetings know I'm a bit of a nuisance, and I kind of am fearless when I'm asking people questions, and so I want to know all of those things, but I also want to achieve the thing where I don't mind making the CEO uncomfortable. So to learn about financials and what the runway is, I will ask, can I ask you a hypothetical? Sure. It's a year from now. The runway's gone. The funding round didn't work. You're in trouble. What happens next? Right? Are they going to lay people off? Are they going to try and cut costs? Are they going to make a significant effort to try and avoid cutting jobs? Or is that the first thing they do?
Yeah.
Because honestly, that's where we're at, right? That's the real question that we're trying to get to. Are you going to lay me off after you hire me? Or to Felicia's point, are you going to pay me well after you hire me?
Well, and we'll just have Sarah as the last question here, because we've definitely gone over. So thank you so much for folks who've been able to stay. But you do want to understand kind of what the plan is. I know of folks who were laid off within 6 months, and during this sort of crazy, upheaval in tech in this last session, the one after the pandemic, the most recent upheaval in tech roller coaster ride we're in. Thanks, Sarah. What's your question? And then we'll finish up with you.
So something that I, given my recent experience, would be asking at the executive level is, by the time you get to the executive levels, you should understand, or at least have a light understanding of their go-to-market strategy and their target industries. Something that I would want to understand from an executive is, what's your backup plan? So let's say if your target industry is healthcare, if that starts to go crazy, what's the backup plan? What's the backup industry that you guys are targeting? What is the product strategy that you guys would pivot onto should the industry that you are targeting have a downfall or a hiccup or something to kind of get you through that hiccup?
Yeah, and if it is health tech is the product, then they may not have a backup. So you wouldn't necessarily ask them that way, but definitely some way to speak to, how does this work if there's a all of a sudden a lull in that industry? How are you thinking about that? Absolutely.
Yeah, healthcare probably not the best example, but if you're doing tech.
Yeah, but sometimes there's can be. It depends on the type of product. It's a great question, Sarah. I appreciate it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all of your contributions today. I hope that you got something out of it. I hope that you had some good breakout sessions as well, and really appreciate everything that you contributed today. Please go and share more over in the Slack channel, and we'll see you next week. Next week, it's going to be Jeremy Donaldson and Ty Rea, and we're going to be talking about prioritizing in your job search, and also how to build your story, and really thinking about your story and really digging into that a bit more. So it should be another good discussion, and hope it's useful to everyone. All right. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jan.
Thanks.
Good night. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.